The night. Everything changed. Love is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down piece by piece until you forget who you were before it began. Some women learn this truth gently, through small disappointments that accumulate over time. Others learn it in a single devastating moment that shatters everything they believed about themselves and the person they married. Cassandra Monroe learned it on a Tuesday evening in October, standing in a ballroom full of people who pretended not to notice her husband's cruelty. The Grand Wellington Hotel ballroom sparkled with the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and waiters moved between guests carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. The annual Hartley Foundation Gala drew the elite from across the state, people whose family names appeared on buildings and whose decisions shaped entire industries. Cassandra stood near the refreshment table wearing a dress her mother-in-law had selected for her. The fabric was expensive, she knew that much, but the color was a dull taupe that seemed designed to help her blend into the wallpaper. It had long sleeves and a high neckline, covering her completely while the other women in the room wore gowns that celebrated their bodies rather than concealing them. She watched those women laugh and dance, their confidence something she could barely remember possessing herself. Across the ballroom, her husband stood with a group of business associates. Damian Hartley was the kind of man people noticed when he entered a room. Tall and commanding, with dark hair that he wore slightly longer than was fashionable, and eyes that could shift from warm to cold in an instant. He had inherited his family's pharmaceutical empire at 28 and had spent the last 5 years expanding it into something even his legendary father hadn't achieved. Cassandra had fallen in love with him during her final year of graduate school. She had been studying biochemistry, planning to go into research, and when Damian had attended a lecture she was giving on protein synthesis, she thought it was fate bringing them together. He had been charming during their courtship, interested in her work, supportive of her ambitions. He had told her that he wanted a partner, not just a wife, someone who understood the scientific foundation of his business. The wedding had been beautiful. The first year of marriage had been acceptable. By the second year, Cassandra had given up her research position at his mother's gentle insistence that a Hartley wife had certain social obligations that required full attention. By the third year, she had stopped recognizing herself in mirrors. Now approaching their 4th anniversary, she stood alone at parties while Damian worked the room without her. She watched him laugh at something one of his associates said, his hand resting casually on the arm of Vanessa Chen, a pharmaceutical sales executive whose family owned half the manufacturing plants in Southeast Asia. Vanessa wore red, a bold choice that made her impossible to ignore, and she leaned into Damian's space with the confidence of someone who knew she was wanted. Cassandra picked up 2 glasses of champagne and walked across the ballroom. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, but no one looked up as she approached. She had become so good at being invisible that people no longer saw her even when she was standing right in front of them. She reached her husband's circle and waited for a break in the conversation. When none came, she cleared her throat softly. Damian glanced at her with the kind of look you might give a stranger who had interrupted something important. "I brought you a drink," Cassandra said, extending one of the glasses toward him. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, almost apologetic for existing. Damian looked at the champagne, then back at her face, and something flickered in his eyes. Not affection or even basic courtesy. Something closer to irritation mixed with contempt. "I already have a drink," he said, gesturing to the glass in his hand. "Why would I need another one?" Vanessa smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "How thoughtful of you, Cassandra. Though I suppose old habits die hard." The comment meant nothing on its surface, but the tone made it clear that Cassandra was being dismissed as some kind of servant, rather than Damian's wife. The other men in the circle shifted uncomfortably. One of them, an older executive whose name Cassandra could never remember, tried to change the subject. "Damian, about the merger we were discussing earlier." But Damian wasn't finished. He turned, fully toward Cassandra now, and she could see something had been building in him all evening, some resentment or anger that he had been waiting for an excuse to release. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Cassandra asked quietly. "Privately?" Anything you need to say can be said here, Damien replied. His voice was pleasant, almost friendly, which made what he said next even worse. We're all friends here. No secrets. Cassandra felt her throat tighten. She set both champagne glasses down on a nearby table, her hands trembling slightly. I just wanted to ask if we could leave soon. I'm not feeling well. You're never feeling well at these events? Damien's smile didn't waver. Maybe if you made an effort to actually engage with people instead of hovering in corners, you'd enjoy yourself more. One of the other men laughed nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. Come on, Damien, let's not— No, I think we should talk about this. Damien's voice grew louder, and people nearby began to notice. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. My wife seems to think that showing up to these events in the dullest dress she can find and standing around looking miserable is somehow fulfilling her obligations. Cassandra felt heat rising in her face. That's not fair. Your mother chose this dress. My mother chose it because she knows you have no sense of how to present yourself properly. She was trying to help you, and somehow you still managed to make yourself look like you're attending a funeral instead of a gala. The circle around them had gone completely silent now. Vanessa was watching with barely concealed delight. The other executives were studying their drinks or the floor or anything that wasn't the humiliation unfolding in front of them. Why are you doing this? Cassandra's voice cracked. What did I do wrong? Damien leaned closer and his voice dropped to something that could have been intimate if the words weren't designed to destroy her. You exist wrong, Cassandra. You breathe wrong. You take up space in my life that could be filled by someone interesting, someone accomplished, someone who actually adds value instead of just existing as an obligation I have to drag around to these events. The words landed like physical blows. Cassandra felt something inside her chest crack open, spilling out all the pain and humiliation she had been swallowing for years. I gave up my career for you, she whispered. I gave up everything. And what exactly did you give up? A research position that paid $40,000 a year? A future of teaching undergraduates and publishing papers that nobody would read? I did you a favor by marrying you, Cassandra. I lifted you out of mediocrity and gave you a life most women would kill for. And this is how you repay me? By making me look bad at my own family's charity event? Something broke then. Not just in Cassandra, but in the very foundation of what she had been telling herself about her marriage. She had convinced herself that Damien was just stressed, that his coldness was temporary, that underneath the cruelty there was still the man she had fallen in love with. But standing there listening to him tear her apart in front of colleagues and strangers, she understood finally and completely that the man she had loved either never existed or had been consumed entirely by the man who stood before her now. She didn't cry. Tears would have given him satisfaction, would have confirmed his belief that she was weak and pathetic. Instead, she looked at him with a clarity she hadn't possessed in years. You're right, she said softly. I do exist wrong. I exist in your life, in your space, breathing your air and taking up room that could belong to someone you actually want. She looked around at the circle of people watching. I'm sorry I wasted everyone's time this evening. Please enjoy the rest of your gala. She walked away before he could respond, her spine straight and her head high. She walked through the ballroom, past the dancing couples and the networking clusters, past the judging eyes and whispered comments. She walked out into the October night where her breath formed clouds in the cold air and the sounds of the party faded behind her. The valet brought her car, a modest sedan that looked out of place among the luxury vehicles filling the lot. She had kept it from before the marriage, one of the few things she hadn't given up. She drove through city streets that blurred through tears she finally allowed herself to shed. Not tears of weakness, but tears of rage at everything she had surrendered for a man who saw her as nothing more than an embarrassing obligation. She didn't drive home to the estate she shared with Damien. Instead, she found herself pulling up outside the university where she had once worked. The biochemistry building was dark except for a few lights in the research labs where graduate students worked late into the night, chasing breakthroughs and discoveries. She had been one of those students once, passionate and driven, certain she would change the world through her research. Cassandra sat in her car and stared at those lit windows and wondered what version of herself she had killed to become Mrs. Damien Hartley. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in 3 years. Professor Elizabeth Reeves had been her mentor in graduate school, the woman who had believed in her potential and who had been disappointed when Cassandra had abandoned her research career. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, cautious and surprised.
Cassandra?
Is that you? Dr. Reeves, I know it's late. I'm sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me. Are you all right? You sound upset. Cassandra laughed, the sound harsh and broken. I'm the furthest thing from all right. I made a terrible mistake and I don't know how to fix it. Where are you right now? Outside the biochemistry building. I don't know why I came here. I just started driving and this is where I ended up. Stay there. I'll be down in 5 minutes. Dr. Reeves appeared wearing jeans and a sweater, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She took one look at Cassandra's face and pulled her into a hug without asking questions. They sat in the empty laboratory where Cassandra had once spent countless hours, surrounded by equipment she had once known how to use with perfect precision. Dr. Reeves made tea using a hot plate meant for chemical reactions, and Cassandra told her everything. The slow erosion of her identity, the constant criticism, tonight's public humiliation. When she finished, Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a simple question that changed everything. What do you want, Cassandra? Not what Damien wants, not what his mother wants, not what society expects. What do you actually want for yourself? Cassandra stared into her tea, watching steam rise and dissipate. I want to remember who I was before I became his wife. I want to matter again, not as someone's possession, but as myself. Then that's where we start. Dr. Reeves stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a folder. I've been working on a research project that could revolutionize drug delivery systems. It's ambitious and controversial, and the pharmaceutical companies hate it because it would make their current methods obsolete. I've been looking for a partner, someone brilliant enough to handle the biochemistry and brave enough to go up against the industry giants. She handed the folder to Cassandra. Interested? Cassandra opened the folder and felt something ignite in her chest that she had thought was dead. The research was groundbreaking, exactly the kind of work she had dreamed of doing. This would destroy Damien's business model. His whole company is built on the old delivery systems. I know. Dr. Reeves smiled. That's why I'm offering it to you specifically. If you're going to rebuild yourself, you might as well burn down everything that destroyed you in the process. The woman who rose from ashes. 3 months after the gala, Cassandra Monroe filed for legal separation and moved into a small apartment near the university. The place was nothing compared to the estate she had shared with Damien, just 2 rooms with outdated appliances and windows that rattled when the wind blew, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture she bought, every choice she made about the space belonged to her alone. Damien hadn't fought the separation. In fact, he had seemed almost relieved, as though she had finally done what he had been too concerned with appearances to do himself. His lawyer had drawn up papers that would leave her with almost nothing, a small settlement that barely covered 6 months of living expenses. Cassandra signed them without argument because she knew something Damien didn't. The research she was developing with Dr. Reeves was worth far more than any divorce settlement. They worked 16-hour days in the laboratory, refining a drug delivery system that used bioengineered proteins to target specific cells with unprecedented precision. The applications were staggering. Cancer treatments that could destroy tumors without harming healthy tissue. Antibiotics that could eliminate infections without creating resistance. The technology would make billions while also saving millions of lives. But groundbreaking research required funding, and funding required dealing with investors who had connections to the very pharmaceutical companies that wanted to see this technology buried. Cassandra learned quickly that the scientific community was just as political as any other industry, that brilliant ideas meant nothing without the resources to develop them. She started attending conferences again, not as Damien Hartley's invisible wife, but as Dr. Cassandra Monroe, biochemist and researcher. The transformation wasn't just professional. She cut her hair short, a practical style that required minimal maintenance. She replaced the muted colors her mother-in-law had chosen with bold jewel tones that made her impossible to ignore. She learned to speak with authority about her work, to defend her research against skeptics, to command attention in rooms full of people who had once looked through her. At a biotechnology conference in Boston, she presented their preliminary findings to a room of investors and industry leaders. Damien was there, she knew, somewhere in the audience, but she didn't look for him. She focused instead on the data, on the elegant simplicity of their solution, on the passion she felt for work that mattered. When she finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. During the question period, a man in the front row raised his hand. He was younger than most of the investors, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and an intensity that suggested he actually cared about the science rather than just the profit margins. Dr. Monroe, your work is extraordinary. Have you considered licensing agreements with established pharmaceutical companies? The development costs for bringing this to market are substantial. I appreciate the question, Mr. Cassandra paused, waiting for him to identify himself. Grant, Thomas Grant. I run an independent pharmaceutical development firm. We specialize in bringing revolutionary technologies to market without compromising the integrity of the research. After the presentation, Thomas approached her with a business card and a proposition. I'd like to fund your research. Not acquire it, not control it, but support it. In exchange for equity rather than ownership if you're interested. Cassandra studied him carefully, looking for the trap she had learned to expect from men who offered help. Why would you do that? You could develop your own competing technology. Because your approach is better than anything my team has conceived, and because I'm tired of watching brilliant researchers get crushed by corporate interests. My father was a scientist who spent his life working for companies that buried his best ideas to protect their profit streams. I started my firm to do things differently. Thomas smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that made him seem trustworthy. I'm not asking you to decide right now. Do your research on me. Talk to other scientists I've funded. If you decide I'm legitimate, we can discuss terms. Over the next 2 weeks, Cassandra investigated Thomas Grant thoroughly. She spoke with researchers he had funded, reviewed financial statements from his company, checked his reputation in the industry. Everything confirmed what he had told her. He was genuine, rare in an industry built on exploitation and profit maximization. They met for coffee in a quiet cafe near the university. Cassandra brought Dr. Reeves and their lawyer. Thomas brought his chief financial officer and a proposed contract that was surprisingly fair. They negotiated for 3 hours, refining terms until both sides felt protected and valued. There's one thing I need to know before we finalize this, Cassandra said finally. Your company has business relationships with Hartley Pharmaceuticals. Will funding my research create conflicts for you? Thomas glanced at his CFO, then back at Cassandra. We do have relationships with Hartley, yes. And funding your research will absolutely destroy those relationships because your technology makes their entire business model obsolete. He leaned forward. But I've met Damien Hartley. I've seen how he operates. If supporting your research means opposing him, I consider that a bonus rather than a drawback. They signed the agreement that afternoon. Thomas's firm would provide $5 million in development funding over 2 years, with options for additional investment based on milestones. In exchange, they would receive 30% equity in whatever company Cassandra and Dr. Reeves eventually formed. It was more than fair. It was life-changing. The money allowed them to hire additional researchers, upgrade their laboratory equipment, and accelerate their timeline. Within 6 months, they had completed animal trials with results that exceeded every projection. Within 9 months, they were ready to approach the FDA about human trials. During this period, Cassandra rarely thought about Damien. She was too busy rediscovering the person she had been before marriage had convinced her to shrink herself. She worked late nights in the laboratory, collaborated with brilliant scientists from around the world, and felt the rush of making genuine contributions to human knowledge. This was the life she had abandoned, and reclaiming it felt like breathing properly for the first time in years. But Damien noticed her. He started appearing at conferences where she presented, never approaching her directly but always visible in the audience, watching with an expression she couldn't read. His mother called repeatedly, leaving messages about how Cassandra was embarrassing the family by working instead of accepting the divorce settlement quietly. His lawyers sent letters threatening legal action over vague claims about intellectual property developed during their marriage. Cassandra ignored all of it. She had excellent lawyers now, funded by her research partnership, and they shut down every frivolous claim with efficient precision. She had learned that the best response to attempted intimidation was competence and success. The turning point came at the International Biotechnology Symposium in San Francisco. Cassandra was scheduled to give the keynote address, presenting their research to the largest gathering of industry leaders in the world. The presentation would make or break their ability to secure the additional funding needed for human trials. The morning of her presentation, Cassandra received an email from an anonymous sender. The message contained a single attachment, a video file. She almost deleted it without watching, assuming it was spam or malware, but something made her open it. The video showed Damien in his office, speaking with someone off camera. The audio was clear and damning. He was discussing strategies to discredit Cassandra's research, to spread rumors about falsified data, to pressure journals into rejecting her publications. He talked about her with casual cruelty, calling her work amateurish and describing their marriage as a mistake he was still paying for. The video ended with Damien laughing about how easy it would be to destroy her credibility because nobody would believe a researcher who couldn't even maintain a successful marriage. The sender had included a note. Thought you should know what you're up against. Good luck with your presentation. Cassandra watched the video 3 times, feeling rage build with each viewing. Part of her wanted to release it publicly, to expose Damien's vindictiveness to the entire industry, but she knew that would make her look petty and distracted. Instead, she saved the file as insurance and focused on her presentation. The symposium ballroom held 800 people. Cassandra stood backstage watching earlier presenters through a monitor, feeling the familiar pre-presentation nerves that never fully disappeared no matter how many times she spoke publicly. Dr. Reeves stood beside her, offering silent support. He's out there, Dr. Reeves said quietly. Front row left side. Do you want me to have security remove him? Cassandra looked at the monitor and saw Damien sitting with several other pharmaceutical executives. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who had nothing to fear from his former wife's amateur research project. No, Cassandra said. Let him watch. Let him see exactly what I'm capable of when I'm not trying to make myself small enough to fit into his life. The introduction finished, and she walked onto the stage to applause. The lights were bright enough that she couldn't see individual faces in the audience, which helped. She launched into her presentation with confidence born from months of preparation and absolute certainty in her research. She walked the audience through their methodology, explaining complex biochemistry in terms that non-specialists could understand. She showed video of their animal trials, healthy mice whose cancer had been eliminated without any of the devastating side effects of traditional chemotherapy. She presented data that demonstrated not just effectiveness but safety, the holy grail of pharmaceutical research. Halfway through the presentation, she departed from her planned script. Before I continue, I want to address something that some of you may be wondering. My former husband, Damien Hartley, is in this audience. His company has a significant stake in maintaining current drug delivery systems. Some of you may have heard rumors that my research is motivated by personal vendetta, rather than scientific merit. The room went completely silent. Cassandra saw Damien sit up straighter, his expression shifting from confidence to concern. I want to be clear about something, Cassandra continued. My research isn't about destroying Hartley Pharmaceuticals or any other company. It's about saving lives. It's about children who survive cancer without losing their childhood to treatment side effects. It's about elderly patients who can fight infections without destroying their gut bacteria. It's about making medicine work better for everyone. She clicked to the next slide, showing projected mortality reductions across dozens of conditions. If my research makes certain business models obsolete, that's unfortunate for those businesses but wonderful for humanity. Science progresses regardless of who profits from it, and I'm proud to be part of that progress. The applause when she finished was thunderous. People rose to their feet, not with polite professional courtesy but with genuine enthusiasm. During the question period, investors approached with offers. Research institutions proposed collaborations. The validation was overwhelming and deeply satisfying. Damien left before the question period ended. Cassandra saw him stand and walk toward the exit, his expression carefully blank, and she felt nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, just a profound indifference to a man who had once controlled her entire sense of self-worth. After the presentation, Thomas found her in the speaker's lounge. That was remarkable. I've already fielded 3 acquisition offers, all of them substantially above our projections. We're not selling, Cassandra said firmly. This research is too important to hand over to companies that will prioritize profit over patients. I was hoping you'd say that. Thomas smiled. I took the liberty of scheduling meetings with several venture capital firms that specialize in funding independent pharmaceutical development. If you're interested in maintaining control while still accessing the resources you need. They spent the next 3 days in meetings. By the time the symposium ended, Cassandra had secured commitments for an additional $20 million in funding, enough to complete human trials and begin the FDA approval process. They also had partnership agreements with 3 major hospital systems that wanted to participate in clinical trials. On the flight back home, Cassandra sat next to Dr. Reeves and watched clouds drift past the window. I keep waiting to feel bad about what this will do to Damien's company. But you don't, Dr. Reeves observed. No, I don't. Is that terrible? It's honest. He spent years making you feel worthless. Now you're proving that not only do you have worth, but you have value that exceeds anything he's capable of achieving. That's not revenge. That's justice. Cassandra thought about that distinction, about the difference between destroying someone out of spite versus succeeding so completely that their destruction becomes incidental to your achievement. I used to think I needed him. That being his wife gave me identity and purpose, and now I know that I gave him legitimacy, not the other way around. He married me because I was brilliant and accomplished, then spent years convincing me I was neither. But the person I was before I met him is still here. She just needed permission to exist again. 3 days after returning from San Francisco, Cassandra received divorce papers from Damien's lawyers. The settlement they offered was substantially larger than the previous proposal, enough to fund a comfortable life without working. There was also a non-compete clause buried in the terms, language that would prevent her from developing any pharmaceutical technologies for 5 years. She sent the papers back unsigned with a note written in her own hand. I'm not interested in your money, Damien. I have my own now. Let's keep this simple. No alimony, no settlements, just a clean break. Unless you'd like me to share that video with the board of directors at Hartley Pharmaceuticals.